Hello. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name's Heather Moran, and I'm the CEO here at 6th and I. And whether you're here with us in person or watching virtually from home, on behalf of 6th and I and our amazing partner, Politics and Prose, thank you for being here with us tonight and for your support of a nonprofit and independent bookstore. So by show of hands, how many are here at 6th and I for the very first time? Oh, welcome, welcome. For those of you who are new, this building dates back to 1908. It was a synagogue for 45 years, and then an African Methodist Episcopal church for the next 50 years. When the church relocated and put the building up for sale, it was around the early 2000s, the highest bid was from someone who wanted to turn it into a nightclub. Now, there's no denying it'd be a great nightclub, but this sacred space was destined for something else. So it was saved within 24 hours, and for the past 20 years, 6th and I has served as a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. It is my sincere honor to welcome Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie back to our stage for the third time. And we're here to congratulate her on her new novel, Dream Count. It is her first novel in 12 years, since Americanah, the unforgettable story about star-crossed lovers that explored questions of race, being Black in America, and the search for what it means to call a place home. It went on to win the National Books Critics Circle Award and sold over 1 million copies in the US alone. In between novels, Chimamanda wrote about feminism in We Should All Be Feminists. In the wake of losing her father, she wrote notes on grief, and she authored the children's book, Mama's Sleeping Scarf. With Dream Count, she returns to writing fiction, which she has said in a recent NPR interview is the love of her life. Parts of it were written at her local library in Maryland's Howard County, a detail that makes me swoon. The novel is about 4 interconnected African women, including 3 who share Chimamanda's Nigerian background and their loves, longings, and desires. It spans continents and social classes. Part of it is set in the DC area, and it unfolds during the pandemic, which amazingly began around 5 years ago, right around this time. Dream Count takes up the very nature of love itself, asking the questions we long to know the answers to. Is true happiness ever attainable, or is it a fleeting state? How honest must we be with ourselves to love and to be loved? Chimamanda will reflect on these questions and more in conversation with Gloria Edom, who we couldn't be more excited to have with us tonight. Gloria is the founder of Well-Read Black Girl, an incredible literary community dedicated to Black women. She's the author of several books, and we have autographed copies for sale tonight of her most recent one, Gather Me, a memoir in praise of the books that saved me. Gloria grew up in Virginia with her parents who emigrated from Nigeria, and we are fortunate to have her bring her lens to tonight's conversation. She's also the Director of Marketing and Communication at Politics and Prose, our partner tonight, which makes this event extra special. Thank you again for joining us, and please help give a warm 6th and I welcome to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Gloria Edom.
Okay, here we are. This book, Dream Count, feels so magical. It is amazing to be on stage with you today. How are you feeling?
I feel so happy and so grateful, and I thank you all for being here. And Glory, thank you for doing this.
Oh, it is my honor. It is my honor.
Thank you.
I'm gonna start right at the beginning with this title, because when I saw it, it just like sat in my mind, dream count, dream count. It was like a meditation. It evokes a sense of introspective, evaluation. It gives you pause. And I want to know from you the significance. How did that title come to be?
Well, it's a title that people will understand after they read the book.
Yes, absolutely.
There is that. We don't want to give too much away. But it actually, it came to me. And I mean that in quite a literal way. It felt like a revelation. When I started writing the book, I did not have the title. And that often happens when I sort of have an idea of what I want to write about, but I don't know what the title will be. And so, this thing is just annoying me. So I actually had imagined that I would call it For Men Only. I'm serious. And because, we have to reach out to the other side. But, no, because in the book there's a reason for that, because in the book there is a blog written by one of the characters, and it's called, in a sort of half joking way, For Men Only. So I thought I would call the novel that, but I remember as I wrote thinking, that title doesn't feel like the novel, because that title is kind of, playful, a bit of a joke, there's a kind of sarcasm in it. But I think the novel is much more than that. The novel just feels so much more, just seems to have more depth in a way than the blog. And so I remember when the title came to me, I was more than halfway through, and it really just felt right. And then, of course, there's a connection to the story itself, which we will not tell them.
No spoilers, no spoilers. I immediately, once I received the book, I couldn't help but go to my bookshelf and pick up Americanah and think about all the memories I had tied to that book. You explore immigration, belonging, the tension between home and the diaspora. Do you feel like Dream Count continues in this complicated theme of belonging and identity?
I suppose so, in the way that I should say that when I was working on it, it's interesting. I haven't really thought about that. I think it's also because I don't think about my fiction in terms of theme. Theme comes in some ways afterwards, and theme, in fact, comes from other people.
Yes.
So I'm learning from you that these are the themes in Americanah. I'm like, really? No. But I remember when I was working on this novel, which just meant so much to me and was a very kind of obsessive time. And my cousin, Oge, who reads a lot of my work, was very excited, and she said, I think this is going to be Americanah Part 2. And I was kind of worried, because I remember thinking, it's not Americanah Part 2 at all.
Wow.
That's what I was thinking. So just to think about whether this one continues the themes, I think in the way that literature, in the way that I think a lot of writing, this is a kind of unnecessary swipe at male writers, but I'll take it anyway. In the way that a lot of novels by men can be said to be, the theme is the quest for this, the quest.
Oh, yes.
There's always the quest.
Yes.
So I think in that way, you might also say that all of my novels are somehow about the themes that you mentioned. But in a way, I think most writers write, we kind of write about the same things, but I think in some ways we take different paths to the subject, is what I like to think. So I would say yes, kind of.
Yeah.
But I also think that Dream Count is very different from Americanah. I think I was also a different person. The person who wrote Americanah is not the person who wrote Dream Count.
Yeah, the evolution.
Yes.
I was in love with the characters immediately. So there are 4 distinct women. that are facing unique challenges. You know, I would love to hear who came first and whose voice was like the strongest. So the book opens and closes with Chiamaka, and then you have, I mean, everyone is so distinct. But how do you do it? I know that seems like such a simple question, but it's like, how did you decide their voices and craft them so authentically?
I don't know. Honestly, this is the most honest answer. I think that there's a lot about my creative process that's intuitive, really. And I think what happens with writing novels, and I think many writers will probably identify with this, is because we now live in this age where you have to sing and dance to sell your book.
Yes.
Hence this event.
Yes.
And
and look fabulous while doing so.
Yes.
Yes.
And, you know, I thought I had to make an effort. This is DC. The black women in this city do not play. So I was just like, this is a Nigerian designer, by the way. But anyway, I think when you have to do these events, which I'm grateful for, but when you have to do them, I think you sort of have to think about answers to questions that you don't necessarily occupy yourself with when you're writing.
Yeah.
You know? So I really don't know which character came first, honestly, but I do know that the first line of the novel has been in my head for years. And I think it came to me, one day many years ago. It's true, though. And the first line is, I have always longed to be known, truly known by another human being. That's the first line, and I had it in my head for many years. And I knew I would write fiction with that as kind of the kernel of the story. But I was kind of waiting for when I could write it. So I think, if anything, it's that idea that came first. But also I knew that I wanted to write about women's lives, but I really don't know which of the women came first. I think they were all kind of swirling around in my head.
Yeah. Well, there's so much about their personal choices, their past relationships. Yeah. I personally could not stand Darnell. Like, what is happening? When you guys get there, somebody text me, because it was a mess. And then the backdrop of...
Let's back.
I won't spoil it. I won't spoil it.
But wait, really, do you not think... So you had no empathy for him?
No, thank you.
All right, can I just say, look, Darnell is a black man in America.
Yes.
Which is not an easy thing to be.
This is true.
Okay. And now when you're in that world of academia, where you...
I'm trying to follow you.
I like that tone. That tone is like, I don't care where you're going, but I'm not going to tell you. All right, I'll leave it alone.
She just deserves so much more, so much more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to intersperse some of the audience questions, because I read, y'all didn't like him either. And I'm just going to put it, as I have my questions, I'm going to pull in the audience questions too. Okay. Because there's an excellent one that addresses just that. And so Chidi says, I started reading your book and I can't stand Darnell. He is insufferable. I wanted more for Chiamaka. Can you talk about how women sometimes accept less than they deserve and what it takes to break free of that cycle? Chidi, I got you, girl.
Please, can I? Where's Chidi?
There she is right there.
Can I see Chidi? Is Chidi here? Okay. So, Chidi, you were not willing to grant empathy to this character? No, no, but really, I feel as though you've actually, and it's very moving to me to see that it's been read how I hoped it would be, which is, in some ways, it's less about Darnell and more about that idea of women accepting a certain kind of, being in relationships in which their spirits are reduced, and also finding ways to justify to themselves why they remain in those relationships.
Yes.
I've always found it, I think...
Yes.
I feel like there are many women like, yeah, that's my story. I've just always kind of, and I think we all kind of, it's either we've been those people or we know friends who are, and you're looking at the relationship from the outside and you're thinking, this is actually bad for you.
Yeah.
But somehow, and it interests me very much, I think, as a writer, but also just as a woman in the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think I often wonder how much of the choices we make are in fact choices, right? How much is this idea that you kind of have to, quote unquote, settle because there are societal expectations, and also your thinking. I think there's a sense in which being partnered as a woman is valued.
Yes.
In the world of women in a way that it's not necessarily the case for men. And so women feel this, I would say, kind of pressure that sometimes is self-imposed, but also is a societal pressure. And so you find yourself, I think, almost agreeing that self-sabotage is love.
Yes.
But it's not.
Yeah.
And how do we break free? Chidi, how did you manage to break free? I feel you look like you have it together. So I feel like you should tell us. But I think if you read on, you'll see that I think it doesn't end very badly. But I also just think it's so important to think and write honestly about relationships, and especially in literature, because I think this is our last frontier for honesty. And, journalism can't do it for us. Film tries, but, there are limitations.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to do that. Yeah. And maybe if someone sees themselves reflected, maybe that becomes a kind of, because in some ways it's kind of like losing weight. People say, you can get all these messages about your health and whatever, but until you decide, right? So sometimes I think a story like this can be the thing that makes a woman see and suddenly think, I'm done.
Yeah.
Right?
Like,
I deserve more.
Yes.
This is unhealthy for me. Self-sabotage is not love.
Yeah. But it takes so much to break away from that despair. And I will say, there are so many moments where you hit us with the truth, but also you make it very funny. There's just a moment where Chiamaka is talking to Zikora, and she calls her, and she's like worried about her, and she starts to cry, and she's like, "What is happening?" And the response is, "I'm 31 and I'm not married," And I'm just going to read your words back to you because I just thought it was so wonderful. And her response was, "When did Zikora take on this despair? From birth, an unquestioned hand had written marriage into our life's plans. It became a time-bound dream. And when did she go from waiting to raging despair?" That idea of raging despair, and it seems like such a thin line from waiting to be married to actually agonizing and making this decision. Yeah. And the way you articulate it is so beautiful, but also you just shared like the complexities of female friendship. Yes. Can you just elaborate on why you wanted to delve more into the support systems women build with one another and how they use these relationships to take them out of challenging situations or push against societal expectations or personal ambition? She's based in DC. There's so many moments where you see her being this powerful lawyer, but also raging with despair because she's not married, Yeah,
and because she lives in a world that has taught her that is maybe the one thing she should value the most.
Yes.
But also because she inhabits a body that has limitations, and she wants to be a mother. Yeah. And she's very much aware that for some reason, nature decided to commit the misogynistic act of giving women all their eggs at once and then making the quality go down as you age.
As you get older.
You kind of wonder, what was nature thinking? Right. Because apparently men's sperm cells are fine until they're like 205 years old. Right. So this character is kind of, it's a very strange place to be, I think, for many women, because it's not a place you want to be in. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I was also interested in female. I've always been interested in female friendships. I think that often, if women are lucky to have good friends, it's another kind of family. It's just the most beautiful thing. And I'm really fortunate to have just the most solid friends. I've had my best friend since, for like 30 years. We've been best friends, and she knows where all my bodies are buried. And she actually has started teasing me and saying, I'm just waiting for you to get really stratospherically famous, and then I'll write that tell-all. And so, watch out for her. But I think, and I think there's just something really, I think very beautiful about having people in your life who get what you're going through, who understand. I think Chiamaka and Zikora, and they're different people, and they look at life differently. And Chiamaka thinks that she wouldn't cry about not being married.
Yeah, because she's like 2 years away.
Yes, and she's like, but would I cry? I don't think so. And so she's quite different. She's very dreamy. She thinks she doesn't want to be single, but she doesn't want to be partnered at any cost.
Yeah, but she with Darnell.
Yes. Ouch. Okay, maybe we can say that she learned after Darnell.
She did. 3 years, she did. You're right, she did.
But also, I think Darnell also shows how nobody quite gets it right.
Yeah.
So Zikora is crying because Zikora has always had very conventional dreams for herself. Zikora wants the big Catholic wedding. She wants, 3 children. She kind of imagines that she's done her part. She got the law degree. She has the good job in the fancy law firm in DC. Yeah. But then the other part doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of women, you're kind of looking at the sky and you're like, when is the husband going to drop down? Because I've done my part and it's not happening.
Yeah.
And then you're sort of meeting men who somehow. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That goes unsaid, yes.
You know what? Someone said to me 2 days ago, an interview in New York, and he said to me, well, your story, the stories in your book are just one-sided, because what about the men? And I remember thinking the whole point of a novel is one-sidedness. I mean, the novel puts you in the point of view of one particular person, but it also made me think about how I think there's still that abiding idea that somehow we kind of need maleness and men for kind of full legitimacy, So he's like, I'm thinking, these are the women's stories, and this is what their stories are.
Yeah. But then there's also, Omelogor, who is absolutely mythical and beautiful. And I'm actually going to read a question that was so perfect. She says, Omelogor is my favorite character in Dream Count with how she embodies an alternative way of living. She feels mythical. I'm curious about your view on myths in literature. Must myths be exercised from realistic fiction, or can they be integrated in a gender-bending way to present alternate ways of living or offer possible solutions? And I honestly do feel like you offer this mirror of another way to be free and to be unconventional in the living of women with her character.
Can we know who asked that?
Oh, yes. Let me see. Oh, I don't want to. Adichie Oma? You know what? You better at this than me. Help me out.
Okay. Adachioma.
Adichie. You in here? Oh, you know what? She's from Tallahassee, Florida. Hey, girl.
Wait, I know an Adachioma. That might be her.
Is this your friend?
It might be.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
I'm going to ask her, that's really me? I'm going to, see, it's interesting. If it is her, I would just argue with her and be like, Omelogor is not mythical. Omelogor, and the reason I feel quite strongly about resisting Omelogor being read as mythical is that it gives us because in a way it's not really hope. If a myth is your response to despair, then it's not really a response. She's real.
Yeah.
She's real in the sense that there are women who choose unconventional paths. Okay. And I think Omelogor exemplifies the idea that there are other ways to live. I think that there are more women who, there are not very many women like her, women who kind of choose to live the life they want to live and are willing to take on the consequences of society, the disapproval, the judgment, that kind of thing. I think there are many more women who would live differently if they didn't have concerns and the fear of judgment.
Yeah.
But I think Omelogor is real. I think she is real. And I do think also that many women who have slices of her. I mean, I can tell you that I've made choices that are not conventional.
Yeah.
And I have absolutely no regrets.
Yeah.
And I think that the internal joy that you feel is always much more important than kind of societal censure, you know?
Yeah. I also want to take us into a space of talking about motherhood. You know, motherhood is such a beautiful recurring motif within the novel, how the characters develop, you know, relationships with their mothers, push against those relationships. And there is a scene, if you have your books, you can turn to page 39.
This is like being in church.
You know, there's a beautiful scene when Chiamaka she's overhears two women talking about her mother, and the line is, to look like sculpture, like art, was to be unusually beautiful. And I was startled because until then, I hadn't thought of my mother as a distinct person, separate from merely being my mother. After that, I felt a flash of sadness, as if in hearing strangers admire her, a unique privacy between us was now lost. And in that witnessing, I think everyone has that moment with their mother when they realize that you are not only my mother, you know, you are your own being with dreams and realities, and it is such a jarring but beautiful thing to witness. Can you tell us about that moment and just how motherhood just plays such a central role in this book?
I love how you notice that tiny thing, because it's, yes, motherhood, I think it's almost impossible to write about women's lives without somehow writing about motherhood. Right? I think I can say that in my life, being a mother has been the greatest gift that I've been given. But I also think that it's such a complex, complicated, multifaceted, multi-everything thing, motherhood. And it just feels to me that literature should have that more often as a theme.
Yeah.
It's always struck me how much we take for granted as themes in literature, such as, you know, the quest, but also other things. And I mean, even baseball has become a theme in literature. But somehow it just feels to me that motherhood, especially when books are about mothers, I think sometimes it's very easy to turn them into kind of women's fiction, which often is not given the kind of regard that other kinds of books are given. And I think it's interesting. It's just a strange thing because, you know, we all came from a woman, and, you know, it seems to me that motherhood is also a very rich subject, just in very literary terms. There's just so much about being a mother, and, you know, the way that society thinks of motherhood, with different societies think of it. America seems very conflicted on what motherhood should be.
Yes.
And I remember when I came to the US many years ago, and there was a conversation in my college that people were having, and one of them said about a woman, they said she has a nanny. And I realized that this was a bad thing in their minds. I mean, so they were criticizing a woman for having a nanny.
Oh, okay.
And I had come from Nigeria, where, you know, the whole idea of being a mother is that it takes a village. Yep. You know, you have your baby, your relatives come. For Igbo people, your mother comes for the first, like, you know, sometimes 40 days in different parts of Igbo land. You're actually not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to just lie in bed, and they're cooking you this wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And the cousins and aunties coming to help
Pepper
you.
soup, yeah.
Yes, and then and I just remember being struck by that. You know, she has a nanny, which was an insult. And it made me think about, and, you know, and then they started saying, why should someone else raise her child? You know, what about the nanny? She has her children too. And I was thinking, have you asked the nanny? I mean, it's a joke. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it also made me think about the American view of motherhood, which I think is partly what can weigh women down.
Yes.
I mean, this idea that you're supposed to do everything alone. And that even to have help, if you're fortunate enough to have help, becomes a judgment on you.
Yes, yeah.
And it's also a society that's not structured to support motherhood. You know, the way that the workplace is structured does not support motherhood at all.
Yeah.
You know, people have babies, and it's true. And you know, so I remember just, you know, in the way that a small moment shows you a larger thing about a society, I kept that in my head for many years.
Yeah.
She has a nanny. And yeah, and so I think, but of course, also this book it's daughters and mothers, and often from the daughter's point of view.
Yes.
So that section you read, which for me is actually quite moving, because I think it's something I recognize from my own life, when you suddenly realize your mother doesn't belong to you alone.
Yes.
Your mother is a person in the world, and for a child, it can feel almost frightening, because that bond is one in which you do not want to share your mother.
Yeah.
You know? And but also, I think it can be a beautiful thing for children to know that their mothers are also human beings in the world.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important for children to know that. But I think in this novel, I think a friend of mine said to me, who read the manuscript in draft form, he said, "You realize that all the fathers are adored, but the mothers, it's more complicated."
That feels like real life.
And I kind of was, well, first of all, I hadn't thought, you know, in the way that I thought, wait, is that true? But then I thought, but like you said, it sounds like real life. I mean, it's...
Let me tell you, okay? So I had a moment, there's another part on page 95, where Zikora is I'm not gonna give too much away, but she is giving birth. And there's a moment when her mother says, "Hold yourself together." And she says it, you know, in her Igbo, she says it in her native language, which I cannot say. You want to give us the indulgence? How do you say it?
Jikọta onwe gị aka.
Oh, yes. And so imagine, you know, you're about to give birth, you need the epidural, and your mom's like, "Hold it together. Like, stop playing right now." And it actually was such a beautiful mirror of, like, my mom's sternness, because I kind of always, like, wanted the milk and cookies mom, and just, like, you know, just do it the American way, Mom. And my mom was like, "Hold it together." You know, she just had a different way of mothering that was more stern.
Yes.
It was a different type of love.
Yes.
And it's like that push and pull of mother and daughter, and you write it so perfectly, because I just felt like, oh, this is what I've been experiencing, but I don't know how to put it into words. Part of her mother's philosophy was to endure pain with pride, especially the kind of pain that belonged to women alone. When she had cramps as a teenager, her mother would say, "Bear it. That is what it means to be a woman." You know, and it's all these moments that, like, you might look at your mother's response to something that is maybe too harsh or maybe not what you want, but it's like, hold it together. You people show their love in different ways.
Yeah. And it is love.
It is love.
It is love.
It's still love.
And I think also we see a bit of what the mother's story is. She has her own story.
Yes.
She's also, you know, seen a lot.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I mean, you know, my mother died, and it's still. I've often said that I've made peace with my father dying, but I haven't made peace with my mother dying, because I'm still so full of rage. You know, I cannot believe she died. But part of my grief has also been regret, because I think just in that way that mother-daughter relationships can be complex and complicated, I think that there are times when I was short with my mother when I didn't have to be. And it's hard for me to remember, it's hard for me to think of comparable situations with my father. I think that with my father, it was just easier for me to extend grace. And with my mother, my judgments were faster, harsher often. And you know, and I look back at it now, you know, with a lot of regret. But I also think that it's quite common between daughters and mothers.
Yes, absolutely.
And I just wanted to stop.
Yeah.
I kind of,
Yeah.
you know, and in some ways I understand it. You know, there's a kind of richness of interior lives that women have that men, you know, God bless men, but they don't.
Yeah.
And I think that often leads to, you know, complexity is never easy. And so I think it often leads, there's a sense in which mothers and daughters see each other.
Yes.
They see each other in ways that they really see each other. And that seeing, I think, which for me is love of the greatest sort, but it also leads to conflicts and sometimes pettiness and, you know, which, yeah. So, I mean, there's Zikora and her mother, I think it doesn't start off very well, but I think there's a sense in which you come to see each other and see each other in context and know each other's stories, and suddenly you're thinking, why? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another mother-daughter relationship is Kadiatou and Binta.
Yes.
And there's so many things that like broke my heart, and that storyline, especially when I got to your author's note and just how you even came to that origin story. It had me just wrapped up. Can you tell us about her character and what drove you to write about this very painful but necessary subject?
So Kadiatou is the character who took the most work in terms of just the writing and the rewriting, and she's the character who I think is most precious to me. So I've said to people, you can say whatever you want about other characters, leave Kadiatou alone. Yeah, just leave her alone. Like, don't go there. But she's inspired. So she's very loosely based on a real woman, Nafissatou Diallo, who when was it? 2011. Yeah, 2011. She accused Dominique Strauss-Kahn of sexual assault. I don't know how many people remember that story. And I remember following it very closely. When I first heard of it, at first it was just the writer in me just thinking, my God, this is so melodramatic. Right, this man is arrested inside the airplane. He's about to fly to Paris, where he's supposed to start his campaign. And it was almost kind of decided that he was going to be the next French president because he was clearly going to beat Sarkozy and all of that. And there's this woman who's a hotel housekeeper who's an immigrant from Guinea. And he's arrested on the plane, and then there's the perp walk, which I found actually just in bad form. But anyway, but also there's a part of me that thought, this is why I like America. You know, I thought in Nigeria or in Guinea, there's no way this big man is going to be arrested because he's assaulted this woman who has no power. And then her case was dropped. And it was dropped because they said she had lied on her asylum application. And I remember watching the interview with his lawyers where they just kept repeating that word liar. And at some point it felt as though the only thing she could be was a liar. And I think it was deliberate. And also that the assumption became, I think for most people who were not really paying attention, that she had lied about the assault. Because they kept saying liar, lied, liar, lied. And I just felt so, I felt that my spirit was wounded by it, really. And for me, it was her, but it was also all the other women who were in positions of this sort. And I also remember reading at that period about other women who worked as hotel housekeepers who said, oh, this has happened to me before, but I just didn't say anything.
Wow.
And I just, so I wrote a very angry essay at the time. And I thought I was done with the subject. I mean, from time to time, I would kind of look her up to see what was going on. She would give interviews. I would read them. I was kind of still interested, but I did not plan to write a fictional portrayal at all.
It was so, I mean, it is so beautiful, and it just gives you pause, and especially the relationship with her and her daughter, and the aspirations and dreams she has as an individual, and the things that she's hoping to pass on to her daughter. There's another line that like stood out to me that when I was thinking of her.
There's nothing lovelier for a writer, and you must know this, Glory, than to know that your book has been read.
Yes. Trust me.
She's read it. This is the best compliment for me, honestly. Honestly.
I did the reading.
I just love it.
There was a moment where you write, An ambulance noisily racing through crowded streets to save a single life, just one life. What a country. If something happened to her, an ambulance would come racing to save her too, and no one would ask her to pay in advance. For this reason alone, if nothing else, she wanted to stay forever in America. A heady miracle to think that this was Binta's inheritance, this land of ease. And I feel like that sums up the pain, the suffering, all that she's going through. This is if nothing else, this is the inheritance to be here in America and have access, to be saved, whether it is in an ambulance or any other way, you know?
Yeah.
It was such a beautiful and clear in your writing to get to that message across.
Thank you.
Yes, of course, of course. I do want to ask, wait, let me go to questions, hold on. I do, because I know there's folks who have their questions. Okay, so this is from Doris, from Oxford, UK. And this is actually, I did have this question as well, because the craft of it, the way the book is structured is so beautiful, but it feels, there's so many different viewpoints, but it feels like one cohesive voice throughout. And so her question is, would Dream Count have worked from a single POV with one of the characters as the main narrator that sustains the entire novel? Did you consider this at one point in the process?
No.
Oh, right. All right, done.
No and no.
Okay. Next question.
I mean, okay. Does it deserve a little bit of elaboration, perhaps? I think it would be an entirely different novel, because I think, in storytelling, point of view really does matter, because point of view limits what we can know, what the reader can know. So I think if you have one person who's telling the story of other people, your ability to get into the motivation of people is limited. We observe people do things, and we kind of imagine their motivations, and we sometimes we give people motivations that are, in fact, not true. I mean, I've heard people talk about why I did something. I'm thinking, that's not why at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that limitation would be an entirely different sort of book, I think. And I did want to have a multiplicity of voices. I did want that. I do have to say that another friend of mine said to me, and the structure could have confused, but it doesn't. It illuminates. And all I could think about was the first part. I was like, could have confused. What do you mean by that? And so I was thinking, is he kind of just trying to be nice? What he really means is that it confused him. But I don't think so, because what I did change, because my first draft had all the characters in the first person. And so at some point I thought there's so many eyes that people might get confused. So I thought I would change two of the characters to the third person. So that you have an I and then you have a she. And I think, but also in the way that the third person often is almost like the first person, but I just felt that as a reading experience, it would make it a bit more seamless.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing
Well, it worked.
I thought about.
This is a question from Noah, and it's pretty straightforward, but is there one thing readers should keep in the back of their mind as they read Dream Count? Do you think of the reader in that way when you're crafting the novel? Yeah.
No, I don't. It's true though, but I don't. I mean, I don't think fiction writers should think about audiences when they write. I think thinking about your audience is just likely to lead to different forms of self-censorship, I think.
Yeah.
I think that there's a kind of radical honesty that I want in fiction. And if you're thinking about who's going to read it, you are going to find yourself holding certain things back.
Yeah.
So, I tell my students all the time in Nigeria, and when I used to teach fiction, I would say, do not think about your father, your mother, your uncles, your aunties, because if you do, there's certain things you will not write honestly. Because you're thinking, Uncle Jonathan is going to read a sex scene in my book,
Yes, you're thinking, anti-patients will be upset.
Yeah.
You just said the word radical honesty, and it makes me think, because what you do is balance this radical honesty with regret, because I feel all of the authors in one way, or the characters are dealing with regret in some way. I'm trying to even formulate my question because it is done so well, so it's like you can tell that you are wanting them to be as honest and clear-headed as possible, but sit with their regret. And you're able to go with, even with like the flashbacks. Like, how was that writing? Can you just give us more of a purview into your process of going in between the past and present within the novel?
It's interesting what you said. So I think, yes, honesty, but not necessarily clear-headed or clear-eyed.
Okay.
I think, if anything, it's an honesty about everything, so that even when you're confused and unsure, you're honest about being confused and unsure.
And honest about the uncertainty.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of acknowledgement of uncertainty. A kind of not an embrace of it, but an acknowledgement of it. And I think as a person, I'm almost addicted to a certain kind of nostalgia. I'm always kind of looking back in a strange sort of way. I mean, sometimes I look at pictures from 1930s, and I feel a kind of melancholy because I miss it.
Oh.
But I couldn't. But it was in the 1930s. I wasn't even born. But I can sometimes just start to weep looking at those, especially those old photographs with their sort of faded beauty, and it makes me imagine that life, and suddenly I'm melancholy. And yes, it does speak to certain problems that a therapist might help me work out. But anyway, this is to say that I think that kind of I think that I think there's that in this novel. There's something quite nostalgic. And I think, but don't we all in a way look back? But it's not even just looking back at the life that we did live, but also looking back at the life we could have led.
Yes.
I've often wondered about the other possible paths that I could have taken in my life, and what that would have looked like. And I think about just that idea of other lives you might have led. And I think so for Chiamaka, actually for I think all of the characters, there's a sense of kind of looking back.
Yeah.
And maybe even taking stock.
I think also what makes the novel just so endearing in the way, because of what's happening. The backdrop is COVID, the pandemic, and everyone was sequestered in place. The questions that you are posing, that the characters are feeling or considering, I think everyone felt those questions. Like, what am I doing? What is, these big ideas that, when you're in your default life, you don't have time to be thinking about, staring at a gray hair and thinking, did I, talk to the right boy? Did I start, you don't have time. But let the pandemic happen, you have time.
Yes.
So was that, I guess my question is really around, how did you approach integrating this global event into the personal stories? How did you know immediately that you wanted to center it around the pandemic?
I think so. I think that the pandemic is such such an unbearably unique occurrence.
Yes.
That for a fiction writer, it's pure gold. How can you not? You can do anything with it. And so I think if I hadn't used COVID, I might have, made them really sick for a while, just so that they would be kind of, especially Chiamaka, so that she would sort of not be functioning for a while so she could look back. But COVID just provided the perfect canvas for that. So I did very much know that I wanted to do that. I don't think of this really as a COVID novel, because I think it doesn't quite go deep into COVID. So in some ways, COVID is backdrop for all of this kind of nostalgia and looking back. But there's something about COVID that, I hope we never experience it again.
Yes.
But that as we were going through it, I think there's a sense in which we couldn't believe we were going through it. But also, like you said, we suddenly have time.
Yeah.
But it's also a kind of strange sort of time, because you're terrified of getting COVID. You're watching TV and there are people dying. And it's just, and you can't, your family's far away. For many people, you're alone, or it was just such a strange time. And I think it just also was an opportunity for storytelling. It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's one that I was very happy to take.
Yeah. I mean, it works. It works. It gives it like a texture and a knowing because we all experienced it. So the questions are like, oh, like I really did feel this way.
And also in the way that the different characters react to COVID in different ways.
Yes, yeah. I also just loved how the parents responded to things. Like there's a scene where she's like, and she invited me to a birthday. Like I'm not gonna risk my life for this birthday. It's just like all these, little small quips that just make you feel like sometimes you're laughing, sometimes you're startled, or you're saddened by it. But it all felt very familiar. I guess like one of the last questions we'll go into is, and then maybe this is just for me too, but how do you balance like the personal and the political in fiction, and particularly this novel? Because it feels like you have mastered that, and it leaves us with more questions. I feel like you have done this incredible job of posing the question and not saying this is right or this is wrong. This is the question.
Yeah. I think that's what literature should do. I think that other forms do the other things better. So I think essays and nonfiction and journalism and history do other things well. But I think literature really has no business trying to... I think a story fails if it's too heavy-handed. And it works best when your touch is light. So I think of that quote from Prose about the writer having different selves. So the self that writes is different from the self that's in the world, like the citizen. And I really do believe that, because when I'm writing fiction, I'm different.
Yeah.
I'm different. I'm obsessive when I'm in the fiction. I really am. And I love my family, but I just cannot talk to them for too long because I need to get back to the work.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sleep because I feel like I'll wake up and it will be gone. So it's kind of just really an obsessive thing. And time passes, I don't realize time has passed. Everything I want to do is in service to the story. I'm talking to people, they say something, what I'm thinking is it might be good for a character.
Yeah. Yes, because that was my other, because the dialogue always sounds so authentic when, there's a scene where she's at Busboys and Poets and you're hopping around DC and I'm like, oh yeah, I feel like I heard that, Like it sounds so are you always listening
I'm
for
always
dialogue?
eavesdropping.
Okay.
Always eavesdropping.
Oh, let me say
always
something.
Watching. I'm always watching. I think to write realistic fiction, you really have to be alive and alert to the world. You have to be, you have to. And so I am always, I still, I'm eavesdrop. I got a great line a few days ago at the airport.
Okay.
So what happens is that I overhear a great line, I write it down.
Okay.
And then at some point, I wait for the universe to reveal to me the character to whom that line belongs.
Okay.
That's kind of the hope.
Yes.
And sometimes the revelation comes and sometimes it doesn't.
Yes.
But really, but the other part, the citizen, I think is very different from the person who writes fiction. I think it's the citizen in me who writes nonfiction. It's the citizen who gives TED Talks, right? It's the citizen who in Nigeria people say, she's a feminist.
Hey.
It's the citizen, it's not the writer.
Yes.
And I am a feminist. Very unapologetically and very happily so.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
but I don't like, I really do not want to be called a feminist writer. I think I'm a writer who is also a feminist. And I think for me there's a difference. There's a really important distinction. And just think about your question between that whole idea of politics and literature, politics and the personal. I just think that literature is so important and so sublime that to attach a political label to it is to diminish it. So, I don't want to write fiction that's propaganda. So I can tell you how I feel as a political citizen. I feel very strongly about justice in the world. I want a utopia where every woman in the world is equal and happy, and whatever dream she has, she can follow, and all of that. But I cannot write that in fiction because it's not the reality.
Yes.
Right? And so, I often, but I also realize that the way I look at the world is reflected in my fiction. So I think, obviously, you read this and you kind of think, maybe the writer likes women. You can sort of, I think you can kind of, I don't remember now who said this, but, I forget who said this, but the writer who said, when a writer writes honestly, they give themselves away. So, but I think it's also about the overtness of the political positions. That literature should not do that. I don't think literature should ever be ideologically pure, right? Actually, I don't think anything should be ideologically pure.
Yeah.
But the idea of literature has to be messy and has to have contradictions and has to sometimes hopefully annoy you.
Yeah.
And because that's life, in the way that...
There's a tension to it. You
yes,
want that.
yes.
So, so naturally, we have a question from the audience that I want to pull into. I'm going to do this quickly. So these are questions that have to do with past books. And one in particular is Half of the Yellow Sun, because you were talking about history and the idea of the literature, not necessarily a political movement, but Half of the Yellow Sun is about the Biafra War.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to know, how did you go about researching the historical context of the Biafran War to accurately portray the setting? And are there any events in the book based on real life experiences? So kind of close to what you were just saying, like, is it, what can be real pulled into? And is it different when it's historical fiction?
I think it's a bit different, though. I think that because Half of the Yellow Sun is actually, it's a kind of fictional retelling of something that happened.
Yes.
And so, it's in some ways, I think it's kind of like choosing to set a story during the Second World War. And at least in my opinion, if you're writing realistic fiction, you do not then decide that actually, something like, change something major. You do not then decide, actually, it wasn't Hitler who invaded Poland. If you're writing realistic fiction about something that's historically...
You stay to the facts.
Yes, consequential. I think you have a responsibility to certain things.
Yeah.
And so I felt that way with Half of the Yellow Sun. Actually, a lot of the stories in that book are they are based on reality. When I take things that have happened, I do things with them. I reshape, I mess around with them.
Like their interior lives.
Yes. So I think Half of the Yellow Sun, the things on the surface are real, but what I think the literature of it is the interior lives of the characters. That I'd read a lot of history about that period, and I think history tells you what happened, but I think literature tells you how it felt.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted to do with Half of the Yellow Sun.
We can clap for that, yes.
Yeah.
And so another question is from an English teacher. Her name is Stephanie. Her students really enjoyed studying your short story collection, The Thing Around Your Neck. Are there any characters from that collection whose stories that you would like to continue, like you did with Zikora in Dream Counts?
Is the...
Oh, there you are.
Oh, thank you. That's a really nice question, which I shall now go home and ponder. Having had this illumination from your question. I don't know, but I never say never, honestly. When I wrote Zikora, I wrote a short story called Zikora before the novel, and so that character is in the novel, but in a slightly different form, because she's kind of, I think, a fuller person. But when I wrote that short story, it was my slow return to writing fiction, and I did not think that she would become more than she was. So I don't want to say never. My first thought was, nope, not going back to those stories. But some of the stories I don't really like very much. In the way you look back at some of your work and like, why did anybody publish that yet? I won't tell you which one.
Here are some questions about writing. They're similar, so I'm going to speed through them. Alyssa, why... Yay! Hey, Alyssa. Hey, girl.
Hi.
So, Alyssa says, why do you write, and is it everything you imagine it to be?
Why do I write? Because I have to. I write because I have to. Honestly, I did not choose writing. Writing chose me. I really do not know a time when I did not want to write. So some people come to writing in different ways. So people have these sort of elaborate stories. Sometimes they read a book, and then they wanted to write. There's a quote, Susan Sontag says that it is reading that makes you dream of becoming a writer. And I remember when I came across that quote, I thought, nope. Reading was very important to me, but reading in some ways was a parallel thing. It felt as though reading was a passion I had, but writing was me. So I always wanted to write, and actually not just to tell stories, but to write. Since I could spell, my brother okay teases me about, he says to me, I think I started reading at the age of 4. Okay is like, really? But that's because he started reading when he was 7. So,
that is such a sister joke.
Yeah, he couldn't read. But it's true. And I would say I started writing at 4.5, honestly. But has it been what I wanted it to be? Yes. And in fact, and more. I just feel so fortunate, honestly. But I have to say that if I didn't have the good fortune of being read and having all of these just wonderful people on a nice day in DC turn up here because of my book, I would be writing. I would be somewhere, maybe in my village, but I would be writing. Because for me, the writing is the thing. But of course, it's also important to be read. I want to be read. I'm very moved by the possibility of human connection. Right? So the writing for me is important because of the writing. Right? But I'm also, otherwise I would write and put it in a drawer. So I do want to be read. And the idea that I can do something that people react to me the way that I reacted to the novels I loved when I was growing up, for me, it's just magical. You know, that something I wrote and something that matters to me moves someone else. I cannot tell you how, it's just magical. So yes, the answer, yes, it is more than what I hoped for. And I just hope that I keep writing. That's kind of, that's what I hope for.
We have a question from Sarah, and you spoke earlier to this. You are a feminist who is a writer who is a feminist, and this current moment in the US feels decidedly anti-feminist. How do you navigate being a feminist in a world that is elevating people who want to reduce the rights of women and other minority groups?
I just keep going.
Yeah.
You know, we have to keep going.
Yeah.
We have to, we have to resist despair, I think, and we have to keep reminding ourselves that what is not normal is not normal. And that's important for me, right?
Yeah.
And I think, but also, I think it's also important to remember we shouldn't pretend that America has been this bastion of equality for women, right?
That part too.
And so perhaps what is happening is a kind of full unveiling of what has always been there.
Yeah.
And so perhaps this is in fact when the real battle starts.
Yeah.
You know? But I do not despair. I will, and especially, when you really think about it, you should not let a person who clearly is unstable be a source of despair for you. Because it's true though.
It's true. Yeah.
I think if you are going to be in despair, make it worth it, Yeah.
Here is a question from Maggie. If you didn't write, what would you have wanted to do for a living?
Is Maggie here? Nothing else.
Oh, she said.
Is Maggie here? No?
Oh, hi, Maggie.
Hi. Do you have any ideas for me, Maggie? No. It's a strange thing in some ways, it's like being asked about, I guess what I would say is if I hadn't, because I can't imagine my life without writing, but if I did not have the good fortune to be published and read, I think I would be a professor. I like teaching, and I would, be very interested in teaching sort of, classes that would borderline disturb the administration. That's what I think. That's the only thing else that I could imagine myself doing and loving would be teaching, I think. Yeah. Fashion design is a thought.
Hey.
No, I'll tell you the other thing I actually quite like. I like interiors. I like doing interiors.
Oh,
Yeah.
We have a book for you, the African Decor Edit. We have to get that one for you.
Okay.
So another question, that since we're talking about teaching and learning, there is so many writers in the room, aspiring writers. Do you have any advice for them in just how to put themselves out there, how to pursue their craft?
Right?
Right.
No, honestly. There's so many people talk about writing and wanting to write, and I'm thinking, well, write.
Right.
And maybe also it's a way of saying, put the fear aside and put the questioning and the concerns and write. Sometimes it's good to actually have the material before you start thinking about, how do I put myself out there? How am I going to get a publisher? Like, it helps to have the material. But I would also say, it's been a while. I don't actually even know how the publishing world works anymore. So when I came to the US and wanted to get published, I remember spending hours in the local library at the time in Connecticut with this very fat book that was called the Publishers Marketplace.
Oh, yes.
And I scoured that book. Like, I feel like I knew everything on every page. And I was also, and then I think there was a listing of agents as well. And I was kind of always looking for the word ethnic. Some of the agents would be like, open to ethnic fiction. Then I would be like, and then I'll write it down. Then I would, And, but I think obviously now, I guess people go online or something. But I do think, though, that really the material is what matters the most. I think write, polish it, get somebody who loves you and who you trust and who can read to read it so they tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Right? But they're telling you the truth from a place of love because it really does matter. That people who tell you the truth, but it's not coming from a place of love, so they're trying to squash you.
Yeah.
But when you know it's coming from love, then maybe the story is actually bad.
Yeah.
Right? And then you would have to go back and redo it. And also, I think maybe the last thing I would say is, two last things. It's never quite easy, so that it's going to be difficult when you choose to write. It's not going to be easy, and I think it's a good thing to keep that in mind when you start. And the second thing is, it has to matter to you.
Yeah.
I really think that it has to matter. It has to matter in a way. It really has to matter, and you have to be willing to sacrifice for it.
Yeah.
If it means waking up earlier than you usually do, if it means, not hanging out with your friends, you cannot, I think, care about writing and want your life to be exactly as it is and somehow expect the right thing to happen.
Yeah.
You have to sacrifice for it, I think. And I think if you love to write, I think it's worth sacrificing things for writing.
Well, that seems like the perfect place to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Glory. You were absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and to Glory Edam. Thank you all for joining us. That was